lecture on the second half of inflation. So let's review a little bit from last time. We learned how to calculate the inflation rate. So for example, if we wanted to calculate the inflation rate for Coca-Cola from 1980 until today, we're going to take the difference in the price between the 2 years and then divide by the price in the first year and then multiply that by 100. So the actual answer would be 125 minus 0.75 divided by that same 75 cents multiplied by 100, and I believe it comes out to around 67% if I'm not mistaken. So let's move on. Today I think we've already covered calculating inflation. However, we're going to learn and make inferences as to how inflation affects different groups. And in order to do that, we have to understand what real income and real interest are. So we'll go through those today. I anticipate this not to be too terribly long. Alright, so a little review from last time. If you feel very comfortable with last time, you can skip ahead to the meat of the subject. Anyway, the Consumer Price Index reflects the, let's see, what is the right answer? A, changes in the prices of goods and services typically purchased by consumers. Okay, those purchased by businesses would be the PPI. Level of prices for raw materials, also Producer Price Index. Prices of all goods and services, that would be our GDP deflator. Okay, not the Consumer Price Index. And I don't know what this means. It's just a distraction. Alright, if the Consumer Price Index goes from 120 to 130 in a given year, then the economy is experiencing inflation of 8.33%. Why do we know that? We take the difference between the two inflation or the two price levels. 130 minus 20 is 10, and we divide that by the original amount, which is 120. Multiply that by 100, and we see that prices have increased by 8.33%. So that's how that goes. All right, next. You might see questions like this on a test. This is pretty cool. A simple economy produces only peanut butter and jelly. So using the data in the attached table from 2008 to 2009, real GDP has done what, and by what percent? Well, first of all, you can tell they went from producing 200 units of peanut butter to 250. So that has increased, and the jelly stayed the same. So we know that we're looking for an increase. So we can cross out B, cross out D. Then the next thing is by how much. So we're looking at real GDP. That means we have to deflate the prices in 2009 back to the prices they were in the year 2008. So basically, we don't have to use a deflator or anything because this is a simple economy. So we're going to make the prices revert back to their 2008 prices so that we can then make a comparison. So GDP in 2008 was $200 plus, if we take 2 times 100, another $200, so it was $400. In 2009, it was 250 times $1, so 250 for the peanut butter, and then stayed at 200 for jelly, so it went up to 450. So our answer choice is it increased by 12.5%. How do we know? Just take those two guys. The difference is 50, divide by the original, times 100, gives us 12.5%. Alright, suppose the nominal interest rate of 7% and the expected inflation rate is 3%, then the real rate of interest is equal to. Actually, this is a preview. This is what we're learning today. Okay, the real rate of interest is just the interest rate after you remove inflation. So let's talk about the Consumer Price Index a little bit. Okay, first of all, the Consumer Price Index possibly could overstate true inflation. Here's why. There's 3 reasons. Number 1, substitutions are not accounted for. Now typically, we learn this in microeconomics, is that when the price of one good rises, you stop buying that good and you buy more of the one that's less expensive. Well, the Consumer Price Index doesn't take that into account. It assumes that you're going to continue to buy the more expensive product, and it could have become more expensive because of less supply or greater demand instead of just inflation. So that's a bias. Number 2, we have quality changes. Sometimes things cost more because they're better. not because of inflation. So the consumer price index doesn't take that into account. Now typically things through technological advances will become less expensive. Okay, and then they don't actually cost more. However, if you look at airbags, for example, they did add to the price of cars. So cars became more expensive. Did they become more expensive because of inflation or because the quality changed? So the CPI doesn't consider that. And then number 3, new goods, new services, and new locations. So new goods are not brought into the CPI until they've been established. Okay. Let's see. But you still buy new goods. So it doesn't accurately represent the inflation. Let's see, what about locations? We have what's called a discount store bias in the CPI. It doesn't take into consideration the fact that we as consumers oftentimes shop at Sam's or Costco or Amazon.com. So it doesn't consider those things. So that's a drawback of the CPI. So here's some more information. All right, we already dealt with these things, so we can deal with that. However, this is new. Okay, we do have the ability to create a different CPI, Consumer Price Index, that is chained. Now, what that means is it keeps up with the prices of substitutes and accounts for how consumers respond to changes in prices. So it's a much more accurate representation. However, it's more difficult. Okay. So we do use that. Now here's why it's more accurate. If you look throughout the years, the difference between the traditional CPI and the chain CPI is, it's significant. And when I say significant, I mean it does make a difference. And the thing is that we use inflation when we start looking at government policy. We're going to use inflation as a way to either increase or decrease benefits that people might receive from the government. So it's important that we get an accurate measure of inflation. So here's our biggest problem of inflation. So I think we may have touched on this last class, but I want to make sure we're very clear. The biggest problem of inflation is that it's uncertain. If we know every single year that inflation will be exactly 3%, we can make plans. It's not difficult to make plans in that respect because you know what prices are going to do. Therefore, you know that you need to make 3% more money next year. Your employer knows that everything that goes into the production is going to cost 3% more next year. And so we can plan based on that. However, if we have inflation that's not exactly the same every year, then that creates uncertainty. Okay, and we have difficulty there. So it creates problems for firms and workers. It would become difficult for us to plan long term regarding our retirement or wages that we need to earn. Okay. Also, consumers are going to change our buying patterns. If we know inflation's 3% on a regular basis, then we don't really adjust there. But if we're worried that inflation's going to be 20% next year, you're going to try to buy everything you need to buy this year, but while the prices are still low. And so it becomes very difficult to plan and to budget. And I'll add another one here. It becomes difficult for banks to make loans because if they're uncertain about inflation, then the loans that get repaid are going to be repaid with money that's worth less than when it was borrowed. And so that all creates uncertainty. Okay? Next, here are the actual costs of inflation. Okay? You can look at these on your own. I think there's some in there that are more important than others. Money illusion, very important. The uncertainty, that's very important. Price confusion kind of relates back to money confusion, or money illusion rather. And then tax distortions, that could be important as well. So there's all kinds of issues in dealing with inflation. These are all of them. But I wanted to highlight a couple that I think are more important. Money illusion. Okay, this is where let's say, for example, your boss says, "Hey, you're doing a great job. You get a 10% raise." Well, that makes you feel like you did pretty good, right? But what if everything you purchase now costs 20% more? Did you really get a raise? Does your income still buy as much as it used to? So that becomes a big issue. and that's dealing with money illusion. So here's some terms we need to be aware of. Nominal wage. Nominal wage is just the stated wage that you are earning. It uses current dollars. Okay, remember back to nominal GDP. It means you're not adjusting it for inflation. Real wage, on the other hand, does adjust things for inflation. All right. So, real income. This measures the amount of goods and services that nominal income will buy. In other words, if you get a raise, do you have increased purchasing power or do you have decreased purchasing power? Okay? So we actually will calculate this. If you get a 10% increase in pay, that's your percent change in nominal income, we need to then subtract out the percentage change in price level. So remember, PL stands for price level. And let's say that's 5%. That means your real change in income was 5%. 10 minus 5 is 5%. Okay? Here's another example. If your income rises by 10%, price level increases by 4%, then your real income rose by 6%. That means you increased your purchasing power by 6%. And that's a real income change. How about this? This happens, by the way. Nominal income can rise by 3%, but if prices increase by 5%, then your real income actually rose by negative 2%. That's no good at all. Okay, so we need to be aware of what real income or real changes in income, real wages are. And the whole point of all this is that if you make more money but everything costs more, then you don't really make more money. Here it is in graph form if you prefer visuals. Okay, you get a 5% increase in pay. Inflation is anticipated to be 2%. That means your real change in income is 3%. Okay. Here's some more about money illusion. We also have this thing called real interest. All right, when you borrow money, the interest rate usually takes into account what we think inflation will be. So for example, if I pay you 5% interest for a loan, but inflation of 10% devalues the money I pay you back with, did you really earn 5%? And the answer is no, you actually earned negative 5%. So again, we have to look at the nominal interest rate. That is just the stated, published interest rate that you're paying on a loan. The real interest rate is the interest rate that is earned or paid after adjusting for inflation. So in the example we just gave, we took 5% as our nominal rate of interest, but inflation was 10%, therefore our real rate of interest was negative 5%. Okay? So when we talk about real interest, we're just measuring the rate of interest after the inflation rate is removed. Okay? For example, let's look at it from another perspective. I'm trying to earn interest now. If my retirement savings are earning 10% per year and inflation is 2.5% per year, my real rate of interest or return is 7.5%. Okay? So to calculate real interest, all you do is take the nominal interest rate and you subtract the anticipated or the actual inflation rate, and that will give you the real interest rate. So in our example, 10% minus 2.5% equals 7.5%. So this might depress you a little bit. When you put your money in the bank, you're trying to save it and make it grow. Well, your savings account is probably paying somewhere less than 1% for sure. And your anticipated inflation rate is about 2%. Therefore, you're turning dollars into pennies because your real interest rate is 1.5%. Now, before we get upset, what if you didn't keep it in a savings account and instead kept it in a, let me see if this is a good picture. What if you kept it in a piggy bank? The piggy bank would earn 0% interest. Inflation's coming in at 2%, and so keeping it in the piggy bank means you earn even less real interest, negative 2%. So that's kind of a bummer. Alright, so some more costs of inflation. You end up with wealth redistribution. Okay, if I borrow money from you and I pay you back money that's worth less, guess what I just got? I got some of your wealth. Okay, that's life. If unexpected inflation occurs during a loan, the borrower is going to be better off, and the bank will be worse off. However, if the inflation was expected, it would have been built into the nominal interest rate, and so no big deal. Okay? So here's some keys. Down at the bottom, if you just want to memorize it, creditors and savers will always lose when there is inflation. Debtors will always win. So, for example, let's look at some examples. If we have inflation, who's going to win? Well, debtors are going to win every single time. Lenders and savers are going to lose. So let's look at some examples. Alright, so banks lend out billions of dollars in fixed-rate home mortgages to consumers. Unexpected inflation will cause, let's see, we just learned that unexpected inflation hurts, let's see, savers and lenders. So the banks would be sad, the borrowers would be happy. Now, just to reason through all of these problems, we have to think to ourselves, okay, what is happening to the real interest rate? Okay, so let's just make up some numbers so we can visualize this. Let's say that we have a 5% nominal interest rate. We expect inflation to be 2%. Therefore, we expect the real interest rate to be 3%. Okay. If, however, inflation comes in higher than we expected and is instead 3%, now our real rate of interest is 2%. The borrower is going to be happy to pay less real interest. The bank is going to be sad to be earning less real interest. Let's do another one. Tom decides to save $5,000 in a savings account at a fixed interest rate of 5%. Unexpected inflation would cause, let's see, the bank is going to be happy, Tom is going to be sad. Again, we have to consider the real interest rate. Okay, so if he's putting it in at 5% and we expect inflation to be 2%, that means Tom is expecting to earn 3%. If, however, inflation comes in higher, let's say it's 4%, now Tom is only earning 1% and the bank is now only paying 1%, which is making them happy. Okay, do a couple more maybe. Erin loans Ashley $10,000 at a 7% interest rate so she can start a pedicure shop. If inflation jumps from 2 to 4% per year, who's going to be happy, who's going to be sad? So here's what we end up with. Erin, here's what Erin was expecting to earn. Okay, she made the loan. So Erin was expecting to earn 7% minus 2% inflation, so she was going to earn a cool 5% real interest rate. Okay, and Ashley was going to pay 5%. So that's how they agreed to everything. However, when inflation was 2% higher, that means these real rates of interest all become 2% less. Okay, Ashley's happy to be paying less real interest, and Erin is unhappy to be earning less real interest. Okay, so let's go through these questions and make sure we're 100% clear on everything. Which of the following spending categories make up the largest portion of the CPI market basket? Ooh, that's a good question. Well, think of your own budget. What takes up the largest part of your budget? Okay, it's housing. That makes sense. Okay. If inflation is a general rise in the price level, why have consumer electronic prices fallen over time? That's a good question. Let's see. A says the demand for electronics has decreased. Well, if the demand decreased, it would lower the prices, but do you think that makes any sense? I don't think it does. Electronics are getting smaller. They are smaller, but that's not why they cost less. D sounds really good, doesn't it? Okay, the new technology actually increases the supply, therefore the price comes down. Okay, suppose prices and wages both double next year. What is true about next year compared to this year? Let's see. Nominal wages would be higher, right? Because everything doubles. Real wages remain constant. You know what? That actually sounds pretty good, doesn't it? There we go. So your purchasing power doesn't actually change. So real wages remain constant. 2012, John takes out a 30-year bank mortgage loan at a fixed interest rate. He buys a house with the loan. In 2014 to 2018, there is a large amount of inflation. Who is hurt and helped by this inflation? Well, we just went over that, didn't we? John is helped, he's the borrower, and the bank is hurt because they're the lender. And the reason is because the real interest rate has declined during that time period. Suppose Felix gets a 1% raise this year, but prices have also risen by 1%. Felix feels richer due to his raise and attempts to change his spending habits. Felix is suffering from what? Dun dun dun. Money illusion. That's where he gets a nominal raise, but he doesn't realize that everything else also costs more. So he has the illusion that he got an increase in pay.